This is the second episode of Winemaker Q&A. Today I'm up at Mazza Family Vineyards with Mario Mazza, and we're going to talk about all kinds of winemaking topics and maybe even get into some how that might relate to brewing and distilling. So Mario, you want to give a little bit of background about Mazza Winery?
Sure. So Mazza Vineyards and Mazza Wines is a family operation. My father and uncle started it back in the early 70s. Back in 1972 they incorporated. Has gone along and had grown quite a bit over the years. I joined the business back in 2005, so it's actually been a while now. It feels like less than that and feels longer in some ways, I guess. But we've grown and added not only Mazza Vineyards, which is the first winery, Southshore Wine Company here in Northeast, Mazza Chautauqua Cellars in Westfield, New York, and then 5 and 20 Spirits and Brewing are all part of our brand. So we've diversified not only in multiple wine brands, but also into brewing and distilling.
Okay, so how much volume are you talking here with all these?
It's grown quite a bit. So, there's a couple ways to measure it. So we not only produce our own brands, but we produce a lot of fresh juice for other wineries and home winemakers. We produce a lot of bulk wine for other wineries as well. And we have some co-pack projects in the distillery. So all scale of things, we kind of look at it somewhere between 450 and 500 acres of agricultural land. So grapes, grains, and hops, predominantly in the Lake Erie region that we're purchasing from. Total amount of gallonage, juice, wine, bulk wine going through our facilities now is in excess of 300,000 gallons.
Wow.
And on the wine side, and then on the distillery side, that one's still kind of growing, nascent, but in some ways. But we do some co-pack projects. So total bottled last year there was a little over 10,000 cases across all products, probably somewhere about 12 to 14,000 cases.
And what are your top products across the business in terms of like maybe types of wine, spirits, things like that?
Yeah. It's evolving. So, I'm not going to deny, we're in a region that's known for Welch's and native varieties, Labruscas, Niagara, Concord, Catawba. So there is a significant volume that is coming out of our facility that is native or Labrusca based. That being said, we're seeing other varieties grow much quicker. So we're seeing some of the hybrid varieties and blends of hybrids, something like our Bare Bones White, that's a blend of Vidal and Cayuga and Treminette and Riesling. That volume is growing, so we're seeing things like Vidal, Cayuga, and Riesling grow. We're finding strength with growing programs where we're getting good, solid vineyards for Merlot or Cabernet Franc locally that have just taken a while to really get to that site selection to make it work. So yeah, there's been a range of varieties and changing. What was being sold 10 years ago is kind of shifting a little bit, so we're still trying to find out. Ever chasing that. Yeah.
So if I know a lot of the winemakers that follow this channel want like vinifera, Merlot, things like that, but also the Concords and everything. But to grow a vinifera grape like the Cab Francs, the Merlots, in a region that's not California, what kind of things do you look for when you're looking for a good site to grow those grapes?
So I guess a couple big qualifiers. I'm, first training chemical engineer, second training as an enologist, as a winemaker. I have experience on the viticulture side, but I don't claim to be a viticulturalist. So this is, big asterisks next to any of this advice. But the biggest thing that I'm finding in my experience, again, we're working with a lot of growers, not growing much of our own fruit. We have less than 30 acres of our own varieties. Site selection is imperative. So we're in what I would consider a marginal climate here. It's a tough region.
It's actually snowing right now, and it's April 28th.
Yeah, so that's why we're inside. We thought a vineyard shot would be great today. Totally wrong.
Yeah.
Site selection is imperative. So, I've seen what can come out of a good site in this region. So some of the first vinifera were planted in this area by the Moorheads. John and Cindy Moorhead, son Mike Moorhead works the farm. John is cousins of Doug Moorhead, who is the founder, well known with Presque Isle Wine. Exactly. So there's a lot of history there. He had a great relationship with Dr. Constantine Frank up in the Finger Lakes. So took some of that knowledge and applied it here and worked to determine how to grow vinifera here what varieties would grow well. So things like Riesling, they've been successful with on their farm. They've actually found, in a certain part of their farm that we've got some really great Merlot growing on their farm. So last year we harvested Merlot off their farm, coming in around 23 plus or minus grapes.
Wow. Yeah.
So phenomenally well ripened,
Yeah.
good color, good flavor intensity, well developed phenolics, no herbaceousness. So that's something to achieve in this area, but it's very site specific. You can't just plant that in any old site. Because there is such variability site to site around the area.
So I'm guessing a lot of like full sun exposure.
Right. Good drainage.
Yep.
Full sun exposure. The trellising and cultural practices are really important as well.
Yep.
So, site obviously gets you probably 90% of the way there, but you really have to be attentive to those cultural practices. Some regions, part of the world, if you read, Sunlight to Wine, you worry about sun exposure or sunburn, and people will talk about those things. I've had conversations with some friends that are much more experienced in viticulture than I, and the general, idea is we really don't probably get enough sunlight in this region to actually sunburn fruit. Full exposure is probably a good thing.
You probably can't get enough sunlight here,
Right, we have enough cloud cover and days with intermittent cloud cover that full sun, full exposure is, definitely something for reds that I'm a huge proponent of. Having worked in the Australian industry, you can definitely sunburn fruit down there.
Yep.
But here, we're finding that's beneficial. So we have some blocks now that have been planted within the past 10, 12 years that we've worked with some of our grower partners. So things like Pinot Gris or Riesling or Gruner, and then again now Merlot and Cabernet Franc, and even Teroldego, that in those sites, managed well, can produce some really wonderful national class and world class fruit.
And do you know, I know you said you're not a vineyard guy, but the trellis types that might help ripen those fruits? I know VSP is really popular in California.
VSP is, what I would advocate for, because you're getting that, you have the ability to control that exposure. It's great for drying out the fruit zone with regards to the moisture that we also endure here. We have some grower partners that have a style that is a vertical shoot positioning system, but it's 4 omniferent. So instead of a single cordon or 2 cordon, single fruiting wire, 2 fruiting wires. The challenge with that is that top fruiting wire gets some shading from the canes, or the shoots, from below. So while we have some good fruit growing off of those vines, they present a challenge with regards to, in the case of Riesling, disease pressure, because you don't get some of the natural drying effect for those clusters that are a bit shaded there.
Sure.
For reds, I'm not as much of a fan, because again, you have some shading of that fruit, so the phenolic and color development isn't as optimum as it could be.
Okay, and for you guys that might not know what VSP is, it's when you have your trunk goes up and it splits along a wire, and then you have, what are they, canes you call it?
The cordon runs across, and you have shoots, basically vertical shoot positioning. So they're all running in a straight upward pattern, and what we have on the trellis upwards is we have catch wires. So those catch wires will hold those shoots in position and keep them from flopping out. There's modifications of that system that you can use as
and you have a fruiting zone, and then you have
your leaf zone above that, right? So the photosynthesis is occurring up here, and you can expose that fruit. A lot of times, typically, if we have north-south rows, we'd recommend full exposure for the eastern side, a little less exposure on the western side, because your sunlight intensity in the afternoon is higher than it is in the morning. So we want to balance out those two sides of the canopy.
And I've seen something more recently, it's called a Smart Dyson. Are you familiar with that at all, where you've got cordon and down and up?
Right, yeah, so there's these split trellis systems. I had a grower down in Adams County that grew Chardonnay on a similar split system like that. They require a lot of management and a lot of hands-on training. So they can be a great divided canopy because you get some great photosynthetic activity, but the effort required to manage them is not insignificant. So I think VSP is good. Smart Dyson, and again, I may be off on this, but I believe the recommendation is sometimes when you have a more vigorous canopy and you need to manage that vegetative growth in 2 directions to spread it out.
So really fertile soils, or
exactly, you got a lot of vigor that you need to control, and so trying to just hedge that back is going to create more dense growth in that canopy, so splitting it sometimes is a way to spread it out.
Okay, yeah, and as a backyard grower, maybe that's something to consider, but as a 100-acre grower, that could just be hundreds and hundreds of man hours, I've got to believe.
Yeah, that's one of those systems that you see in limited areas. VSP is nice from the fact that it can be mechanized to a degree.
Yep.
So, harvesting obviously can be mechanized through that, but pre-pruning. So instead of having to prune, you can run basically a pre-pruner through that VSP system and leave your cells with just a little bit of wood to finish pruning to the correct bud count.
Oh, okay.
So that can save the pruners quite a bit of time, save a bit of man hours. So that's important with regards to mechanization. The other aspect is that leaf and fruit exposure. So you can run different types of leaf pulling machines, either a mechanical one or a pulsing, an air pulse machine that can then adjust the leaf coverage in that fruiting zone. So that mechanization is much more cost effective and time effective than having, vineyard workers go through manually pull those leaves and adjust. Although that is necessary in smaller blocks. We're fortunate there's a couple growers that have those machines here. Some use it for just themselves. One grower, he actually will do that work, contract for a number of other growers, which is actually quite nice.
Cool.
So it gives them access to a piece of equipment that might not be justified on their size farm normally.
Okay, well let's move into the winery stuff then. So I know one big thing is just preventing problems in winemaking. Are there any suggestions you have maybe during primary fermentation just to assure that things are going to move along smoothly and not veer off course, and just in general winery operations?
Yeah, I guess the couple key things. First thing is sanitation. Good sanitation goes a long way. So as long as your fruit integrity is intact and you have good quality fruit coming in that doesn't have a deterioration, making sure that your sanitation is good throughout the winemaking process is going to help reduce the risk of any spoilage organisms being introduced.
Okay.
So I always look at winemakers like to kind of claim, God's gift to whatever it might be. I look at it as more of, if we can get it right in the vineyard working with the grower, it's my job and my winemaking team's job to just not screw it up.
Right.
It's really hard to make good wine out of crappy fruit. You can't do that. But you can make crappy wine out of good fruit. So our goal is to not lose anything and not screw anything up that we gain in the vineyard. So a lot of it's just preserving that. So good sanitation. The other thing that we've been spending a lot of time on, this might be getting kind of technical into the weeds, but I think there's still a place for it, is yeast nutrition and yeast health. So making sure the yeast are happy during fermentation. Obviously they've got the sugar there, but this idea of yeast assimilable nitrogen, YAN, that people talk about, having that nitrogen component. We spend a lot of time measuring this on our side and have for over 10 years now, so we have a great database of all our vineyards of what they do historically. Great thing, and Cornell has said this as well, history doesn't mean anything, you got to measure it every year to find out what it is. But making sure that you're making the right nutrients and adds, because it's kind of like our diets, we can't live on sugar alone, we need some other vitamins and minerals and nutrients. So understanding that is really important. So there's definitely some supplements that can be helpful with regards to that. If anybody's ever had a ferment that gets a little bit smelling like rotten egg gas, that H2S smell, that's a lack of nitrogen. So when you're adding that because you already smell that, that's reactive. We're trying to be proactive, measuring up front, and we now have a whole calculation we go through in terms of how much nitrogen we need to add, how much should be, ammonia versus primary amino nitrogen or amino acids, to make sure that that yeast is getting a balanced diet. And it depends on the yeast strain too. So it actually can get, unfortunately, quite complex, but we need to pay attention to those things because it's amazing the impact on wine quality in the end.
Yeah. Well, that's a question. So I always hear YAN, feed your yeast based on what they need by knowing your yeast assimilable nitrogen. And you can sometimes get that from the grower, but let's say you're a home winemaker and you don't get that information from the grower. Is that something that you think would be measurable at home, or is it something that would need to be sent to a lab? Or
it's something you're going to want to, so the way we measure, there's two methods. There's the wet chem method, a wet chemistry method with a formal titration using formaldehyde. Would not recommend anybody do that because you need hood space.
Okay.
Definitely, you're not use formaldehyde type thing. The other method is an enzymatic assay that you use a spectrophotometer to read. So you need
the equipment.
Not huge, but it's a few $1,000s for a spec to read that, and then you have to have the associated cuvettes and micropipettes and things. That being said, we have with our customers, either home winemakers or wholesale, other wineries, we provide that information. It's as important for us to provide that as it is Brix, pH, TA. You know, that's the fourth core juice array analysis for us, is that yeast assimilable nitrogen number. So a lot of growers won't have that information. They'll kind of know nitrogen status in terms of what they added in the vineyard. The winery is usually the one that's either measuring it themselves, or they're sending it out to an ETS or a Vincourier or somewhere to get it measured.
Okay, cool. All right, and then I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but you said you sell juice to home winemakers. Do you sell grapes to home winemakers too? No, we don't get into grapes. Dealing with a lot of our growers that are mechanically harvested, it doesn't end up being very conducive to being able to have fruit available for those. Okay. Well, let's talk about, you said keeping things clean is really important, and I see you've got like hundreds of barrels here, and something I'm dealing with right now. So I have a 30-gallon barrel in my basement, and I'm at a stage where I'm at the level of oak that I need.
Right.
But I need to make a decision. Do I keep that wine in the barrel, let it continue to oak, and find something to blend it with that's maybe unoaked? Or do I pull it from the barrel, but now I have to deal with an empty barrel? How do you stop an empty barrel? I've heard a lot of ways, but what's your best way to stop an empty barrel from spoiling on you?
So, wood is a porous material, so it's actually one of the hardest things to maintain and clean. Stainless tanks, when they're empty, easy. You can clean them, sanitize them,
leave them
dry, and let them sit for a few months. And when you're ready to use it again, you re-sanitize and go. Oak is a whole nother ball game. So for our cooperage program, whenever we have barrels that are emptied, say we've got actually just recently entered 2016 Cabernet Franc, blended and bottled it. So that barrel wad is now empty. So those barrels will get gamma jet washed. So this is what they call an impingement. Basically, it's like a little pressure washer head that spins 360 degrees inside the barrel. So you kind of flip the barrel over 180 degrees. The head goes up underneath through the bunghole, and it washes that barrel out.
And it's just spraying water?
In that instance, we start off with hot water. So we hook it up to a pressure washer with heated water, and that gamma jet's inside of the barrel. So we usually run 4 to 6 minutes for a relatively healthy barrel. We call a healthy barrel something that hasn't had an infection or spoilage or anything. After we do that, then we go ahead with just a low pressure kind of little sprinkler ball hooked up to an ozone water machine. Okay. So ozonated water, that acts as a sanitizer, and so it sanitizes the barrel. We'll flip the barrel up and we add about 5 gallons of water, a little bit of metabisulfite, and a little bit of citric acid, 20 grams each. I'm a big proponent of storing barrels wet, not dry. So some people will burn sulfur wicks in barrels and store them dry. I prefer wet storage, a couple reasons. One, that sulfur citric solution, it will volatilize, so it provides sanitation for the whole barrel. You don't have to fill the barrel entirely, so you don't have to waste water. Secondly, it maintains the moisture in the barrel, so we don't have any shrinkage of the head staves or any of the barrel itself, so we're not dealing with any leakage issues when we go to refill those barrels, and that's important for us as well. So that, on top of staying in a fairly constant temperature, constant humidity environment, such as this warehouse, ensures that those barrels are just being maintained. So even after their third or fourth fill and they have a reduced impact of oak, they're still good as a aging vessel, because you still get some of that oxygen ingress and some of that evolution that way. There may not be some of the extraction and flavor components, but there still is some of that concentration going on with regards to that aging.
Yeah, the micro-oxidation, the flavor concentration. And I guess you could always add oak staves or cubes, right?
Perfect, yeah. We use big fans of some of, like, they look like essentially sausage links. You get 6 in a pack. You might not want to add 6, that might be too much, but you can add 2 or 3. A lot of that has to do with, and you'll notice some of the barrels, maybe not some of the shot here, but have other wineries' names on it. We actually tend to bring in more second and third use cooperage than we do new cooperage. A lot of that has to do with the wines we're growing in this region, the grapes we're growing. We're not in a hot climate, so we don't want to kid ourselves that those flavors and we're at a 14 or 15% alcohol wine. We're not. So we want to make sure that the wine and the oak is balanced.
Okay.
So second and third use oak, or when we're using more neutral oak and adding those adjuncts, so some of those staves or some of the links, that those are in balance, so not full new oak impact, because that can overpower the wines. And then suddenly you just taste the oak, you taste the secondary aging characteristics, none of the primary fruit. And that's, to me, out of balance.
I agree, yep. So, Mario, so you said you can take this barrel, you can use it when the oak kind of stops extracting, put supplements in, like the sausage link staves and things. Is there ever a limit to how, like, can you keep a barrel forever if you keep it healthy, or is there a point where the wine's soaking actually through the wood someday?
So at some point, in the wine industry, typically they kind of work their way into something else. So, and this is where it kind of is neat for us, because with the distillery and the brewery, we're starting to see where the future life is for these barrels. So sometimes they might make it into a fortified wine program, those things like port and sherry.
Okay.
We're also now seeing a sharing of oak between brewery, distillery, and winery. So a couple examples are, we've had some neutral white wine barrels that went over many years ago to the distillery and have a save all brandy that have been aging in there for, I think we're up to about 8 or 9 years on the oldest one. So in a little while, someday those eventually get released.
Yeah.
We have fortified wine barrels here that were actually originally whiskey barrels. We used for fortified wine for a number of years. Now we're back doing a secondary cask age for our rye whiskey from 5 and 20.
Interesting.
The brewery has inherited, unfortunately, we've had run across some Brett barrels. We get them out of the winery as quickly as we can so that we don't get any further infection, but that has worked for making a few Brett style beers, but we have to keep those very segregated from everything else to avoid cross-contamination.
And Brett, if you know what Brett is, Brettanomyces is it's a beer yeast, really, right? That can kind of get into a wine and all of a sudden create an off flavor that you don't want in your wine. Is that right?
Right. It's something that brewers find attractive in certain styles, so sours, and in certain old world winemaking styles can be viewed as complexing because you might have hints of some of these barnyard characteristics, but in the extremes it can be extremely smoky, Band-Aid smelling,
horse
Hessian,
sweat.
Horse sweat, wet straw,
newspapers.
So there's
I never see that stuff on the back of a wine label. Wet straw.
I don't think it sells well these days. So we try not to. Maybe at low levels it's complexing, but as soon as you can identify it, it seems to be something now that is not desirable. Those are some of the things we're starting to do with cooperage. We actually have also, while you can't see them here right now, we have some barrels that are a little bit larger. So these are either Bordeaux or Burgundy style barrels, and you can't really tell from the front shot, but basically just the style of the cooperage, but they're all about 225 to 229 liter barrels, so 59 to 60 gallons. So fairly standard sized wine barrel. We've started now last year using a puncheon program. So puncheons are larger barrels. We've selected some 500 liter French oak barrels, and the reason we chose those, being new oak, a larger barrel, that volume to surface area, so the volume's twice as much with only a little bit more surface area, we don't have as much oak impact as you would a standard size new barrel. So we see these barrels as a great way to work with. We're trialing some Carmine, Merlot, Teroldego, and Chardonnay in those right now. And we'll be getting some new in every year. The longer term goal is those barrels then can find their way to the distillery for Joe to do some secondary aged projects in the whiskey side, and then if Paul in the brewery is really patient, in about 6 or 7 years, he'll get to see those barrels to do some beer projects.
That's really cool. So I know on like a 60-gallon barrel, you might have to put, I don't know, a bottle a month kind of thing in it to top up. So how much do you have to do on a puncheon?
It's probably a little bit more than that. I don't actually measure how much is going in. So the way we set up topping is they'll bring in a tank with topping wine, and we have a little
Like
pump.
almost like a keg, or
We used to do it out of kegs. Now we do it, 100, 150 gallons at a time just to top all the barrels, so you're not filling, 5, 6, 7, 8 kegs. And the discharge of the pump, it basically looks kind of like a mini stainless gas pump.
Okay.
And we just have tubing so that you can basically work up and down a ladder and just top all the barrels in place. And so our barrels are all set up intentionally with this extra space between. It turns out when you this is the dorky engineer in me, if you leave this set up rather than taking the barrels down every 6 weeks to top them, you can actually have somebody just go through with a ladder and they can get through and top all the barrels in place. They can also sample them all in place without having to move anything. So it saves a lot of forklifting time.
so these racks have just enough space to reach a topping gun in there.
Yep, you can get a topping gun in there. So they'll go through about every 6 to 8 weeks and top. And we probably don't have as much evaporative loss in this room as we did where we had the barrels previously years ago. Again, the humidity control, temperature control in this room keeps that loss to a minimum.
Do you know roughly the percent humidity that you're looking for?
So I don't have it, I was monitoring it early on, but it's floating kind of the 60% range plus.
Yeah, I can actually feel it. Feels a little bit, because it's still dry outside, but right now I can feel a little humidity in here.
Yeah. So we're trying to maintain that. We're going to be probably monitoring it a little bit closer. We don't want to get it too dry because then that starts to suck more out of the barrels. But obviously too moist in here, it's not healthy for the exterior in terms of, potential mold growth outside, and then also the other part of the warehouse is all finished goods case storage, so that's not healthy for the cartons or anything else.
Okay. All right, so I was looking over here, I saw you had a lot of sparkling wines, it looks like, over there?
Yeah, so we make a little bit of traditional method sparkling, so bottle fermented sparkling, and absolutely we can go check that out and talk about that.
Yeah, let's go check it out. So what do you have here?
So here we've got some of our cages and then riddling racks. So for those that maybe aren't familiar with the traditional method sparkling, you basically create a base wine, so ferment it as you normally would for the most part. There's a lot of caveats with this, but you're making a base wine, and then the secondary fermentation occurs in bottles. So we bottle that yeast, we add a little bit more sugar, we take that wine and bottle ferment it. So we take the wine, add a little more sugar, add a second culture of yeast, and crown cap it, and this bottle sits typically on its side in a cage like this and does the secondary fermentation.
So these are fermenting and pressurizing as we speak.
Correct. So those are building pressure. It's going to take, a couple months, maybe a little bit longer, 3 or 4 months to go through that secondary fermentation. We'll actually go through and measure both the pressure in the bottle and how much of the residual sugar remains. If the sugar's been depleted, determine when is that done. And you can actually see, although I can't pull one out of the cage right now, but that yeast bed is formed kind of on the bottom of the bottle as that's settled out. What we need to do then is take these bottles when they're done with that secondary fermentation and shake them up. So we actually have shakers over there that you can't quite see, but those will shake the bottles up enough to dislodge the yeast from the side of the bottle, and then we can put it on the riddling racks. And then they get a quarter turn and a knock a couple times a day. And the goal is to basically drop that yeast sediment down to the neck of the bottle. So I can actually take one of the clearer ones, and so in the clear bottle you can really see, if you look up close, that sediment has fallen all right to the neck of that bottle.
Oh yeah, it's packed like a little disc.
Yeah, a little wad. So once we make sure that we're happy with how clear and everything is off the interior of the bottle, we can then take this bottle and dip it into a freezing solution. So we'll pre-chill them in the cooler, get them down to about 30. And then the neck is just in a chilled glycol solution. It freezes in a little ice cap, that sediment. And the natural pressure, you can just pop that top off, and the pressure will blow and disgorge and dislodge that yeast.
Okay, and are you popping it like upwards angle? Like how do you make sure you don't blow all your wine out?
Yeah, so it's kind of on its side and then quickly turned on.
Okay, so as soon as it pops, you like flip it up.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a technique and practice after a few $100 you get.
Yeah, I read a lot about this stuff, and they're like, yeah, you pop the top off and it shoots out. But you're like, well, isn't the wine going to spray everywhere if you And then do you cap it real quickly after that?
Yeah, so what we'll do is actually typically at that point, because you do lose a little wine, there's a little bit of a topping process. So you'll top it up. At that point, it's called dosage. So you can decide if you want to do anything with regards to residual sweetness, maybe some other blend of other wine that maybe blend in just to adjust flavor, sweetness, whatever it might be with the wine. So you do that dosage, top it off, and then that's when you would add your traditional cork and ware hood.
Oh, cool.
We're still using typical yeast or normal yeast, I should say, that we are just suspending in tank. We're not using encapsulated yeast. There are encapsulated yeast that you can actually utilize that don't require this much longer riddling process. They'll just tip the bottle up and follow the neck of the bottle. And we've done some disgorging for some other people with those, and it seems like it's a great idea. And when it works well, except we had someone we worked with that we were disgorging a couple thousand bottles for them, and unfortunately, the encapsulated yeast had set too long, and the encapsulation had started to break down, and so the yeast had already escaped. So we actually had to go through a riddling process anyways. And that encapsulated yeast was actually sticking to the bottoms and the sides of the bottle. So we were sitting there shaking these bottles like crazy, trying to get it to
it's even more work.
So it ended up being more work, yeah. And in the encapsulated yeast, you actually have to dose bottle by bottle when you're filling them. So it's smaller volumes. It makes sense. When you're doing a little bit larger volumes, it gets to be kind of an owner's process.
With encapsulated yeast, do you have to ferment it completely dry in the bottle, or will the yeast kind of fizzle out at some point because it's not multiplying?
Usually you're not getting another generation of yeast when you're doing this type of fermentation, secondary fermentation.
Okay.
You've got a lot of things competing against you at this point. It's kind of like starting to stock ferment.
Sure.
You already have quite a bit of alcohol in there, so that's already hard for the yeast. So making sure that culture, when we introduce it, is healthy is really important. So we're paying very close attention to the nutrient status, the wine pH and chemistry factors into it a lot, and so we'll do a cell count as well with the yeast culture going in to make sure that we're dosing the right amount of viable cells to ensure that we get through the secondary fermentation. It's a lot of work to go through to put this all in the bottle to find out that those yeast died and they didn't make any bubbles. That's the last thing you want to find out. And I'll admit, I've been doing this myself for 13 years, and we've been doing it much longer than that here. Unfortunately, I can think of one instance, where we had that happen. So we had to go through and pop bottles, add a fresh yeast culture back to get that secondary ferment going. So you want to do everything up front you can so you avoid that extra work later on.
Well, have you ever had the opposite problem happen where maybe there's too much sugar for the yeast to eat and it starts exploding bottles on you?
No, thankfully not. But that is a big risk. So you want to you have 2 or 3 people check the math to make sure you're not adding too much sugar, because if you add too much sugar, you could get way over pressure, and these bottles are only built for so much pressure. You definitely don't want that. So we're really careful about making sure you don't add too much.
I've heard in the old days, like in the 1800s, before bottles were as good as they are now, if you were a riddler, a chain reaction could set off and the whole thing could just start blowing.
I could only imagine. So I can't even think of the last time we had one. Last time we had one go riddling. Usually, if something's going to break, it's going to break in the cages, and maybe out of maybe 1 out of every 5,000 bottles. And we don't get many to break, fortunately.
Cool.
So but whenever anybody's handling these and actually doing the riddling, we want to make sure that they're handling with gloves, safety glasses, things like that.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to talk with me, Mario. If you guys want to check out Mazza Winery, it's right on Route 5, just about a mile from the New York PA line in Pennsylvania. And 5 and 20 is up on Route 20
in Westfield, New York.
Okay, and it's what, 10 minutes away, 15?
About 15 minutes away, 15 minutes east of here.
Yeah, so if you're in the Lake Erie wine region, check them out, and also make sure you hit the little subscribe button at the bottom to see more cool videos and winemaker Q&As like this, and check out my website, smartwinemaking.com. Thanks for watching.